The story of progress rushes along the rails, but sometimes it ends in fire, metal, and panic. Today, we will remember 5 crashes that shook the world and left a scar in the memory of generations. The year 2002 will forever remain in Egyptian memory as the day when an ordinary passenger train became a burning symbol of tragedy and social flaws. The train, packed with people and traveling from Cairo to Luxor, suddenly caught fire en route. According to eyewitnesses, the source of the fire was the kitchen car, where leaky equipment, disregard for safety rules, and a lack of proper supervision created the conditions for disaster. At the moment the fire broke out, the train was traveling at high speed, and gusts of wind contributed to the rapid spread of the flames through the aisles and seats, turning the carriages into an oven from which people tried to escape by any means possible. Panic instantly gripped the passengers. In desperation, many threw themselves out of the windows at full speed, exposing themselves to the danger of death from impact with the rails or debris, while others tried to make their way to the doors, but jammed locks, smoke, and crowding made any attempts virtually futile. Scenes of horror and heroism unfolded before the eyes of those around them. Passengers helped each other, strangers became rescuers, and local residents and station workers, upon learning of the fire, rushed to help, breaking windows and carrying people out, risking their own lives. It was officially recorded that more than 370 people died as a result of the fire, and this number became a cold measure of the abyss of pain, where behind each digit stood real destinies, families, children, parents, and stories that were cut short suddenly and senselessly. The investigation revealed a whole range of systemic problems: lack of regular technical inspections, low fire safety standards on rolling stock, poorly organized maintenance procedures for kitchen units, and possible violations in the procurement of spare parts and equipment. Over time, journalistic investigations and reports by human rights activists pointed to corruption and inefficiency in certain parts of the railway network, and public outrage demanded answers and punishment for those responsible. The government, seemingly forced by the weight of public grief, declared a national day of mourning and promised a full investigation. But for thousands of families, this formal gesture was far from enough to make up for their loss and bring back their loved ones. After the disaster, long months of identifying the victims began, with relatives waiting for news and experts examining charred fragments and personal belongings, which were sometimes the only key to identification. The wounds to society were deep. Survivors bore the scars of burns and injuries. Many suffered from post-traumatic stress, and children who had lost their parents demanded attention and long-term support. The tragedy left its mark on the country's cultural life. Documentaries, reports, books, and eyewitness accounts recorded the details of that terrible night so that society would not forget the lessons and repeat the mistakes of the past. Memorial events and commemorative signs at the site of the accident became a regular place of mourning, where people brought flowers, lit candles, and read the names of the victims so that their memory would not be lost in the flood of news. Changes were made in the administrative sphere. Requirements for carriage maintenance were tightened, additional checks on kitchen equipment and power supply systems were introduced, fire safety measures and staff training were strengthened, and instructions for passengers on how to behave in emergency situations were developed. However, many critics noted that the changes were slow and often insufficient until public pressure and international recommendations forced officials to act more decisively. International solidarity expressed by other states and humanitarian organizations helped with initial rescue and medical operations, provided resources for the temporary rehabilitation of victims, and supported efforts to improve railway safety standards. Personal stories related to the disaster still touch the heart. Those who gave their lives to save someone else's child, those who miraculously survived because they missed the train, families who sought the truth for years and achieved compensation and recognition of guilt. The event became a turning point after which society demanded transparency and accountability in the transport sector, and the memory of those who died became a catalyst for civil initiatives to monitor safety and support victims. In social terms, the disaster highlighted the problem of inequality and vulnerability. Overcrowded trains, aging rolling stock, and savings on necessary safety measures most often affected the most vulnerable sections of the population, who were forced to seek affordable transport at the expense of their own safety. This pain and resentment were reflected in public debates about the priorities of state funding and the fact that the safety of citizens should take precedence over short-term savings and corruption schemes. The memory of Al Yamama remains a call to responsibility, to the need to remember those who perished in the flames, to the obligation to improve safety systems and to fight those who undermine the public good for personal gain. Ultimately, The disaster was not only a tragedy for the individuals involved, but also a serious lesson for the country, a reminder that infrastructure without moral control and proper technical care can turn into a deadly trap. And although years will pass and new generations will replace the old, the memory of those who perished in the fire must remain alive so that their loss is not in vain, and so that their pain gives rise to changes that will protect others from a similar fate. This lesson will require not only laws and regulations, but also constant public oversight, honesty on the part of officials, and care for every passenger. The 1988 disaster in Esquide was a stark reminder of how a single technical malfunction can turn a modern symbol of speed and comfort into a destructive force. On that day, the ICE high-speed train number 884 was racing along the German rails on schedule, and the passengers, rushing to their business and social engagements, did not expect the disaster that was hidden in the smallest element of the design. At high speed, as the train was traveling through the area near Esquide, a wheel burst, but it was not a simple puncture. An internal fragment broke off, piercing the bottom of one of the carriages and damaging the switch mechanism on the tracks. The damage to the switch caused the 16-carriage train to derail and burst into flames at the point where the rails met the ground, resulting in a devastating explosion of fire and metal that instantly reduced the carriages to flames and debris. 101 people died in these events, and this number became a heavy burden for German society and the international railway community, because what happened destroyed the illusion of the absolute reliability of high technology. After the disaster, a comprehensive investigation was launched. Experts studied the metal of the wheel, the design features of the running gear, maintenance procedures, and the quality control system for parts. It turned out that the cause was not only metal fatigue, but also a chain of organizational errors: insufficient control during wheel inspections, failure to replace defective parts in a timely manner, and gaps in the certification of component suppliers. Journalists and the public actively demanded accountability, and the results of the investigations revealed problems in regulations, procedures, and corporate practices that could allow risky compromises to be made in order to save time and money. The tragedy in Esquide forced a rethinking of safety standards. Engineers and regulators across Europe reviewed wheel inspection methods, tightened rolling stock inspection requirements, introduced more rigorous inspection cycles, and improved diagnostic systems to detect even the smallest defects. New wheel design standards were introduced, material certification was strengthened, and procedures for interaction between operators and suppliers were revised to prevent similar chains of events in the future. In addition to technical changes, the disaster prompted a strengthening of the safety culture. Companies began to pay more attention to staff training, the exchange of information about defects, the organization of independent inspections, and transparency in decisions on the decommissioning and repair of components. The families of the victims spent many years seeking justice, compensation, and answers as to why such a breach in the system had occurred, and public demand for transparency became a powerful impetus for reform. The image of the train that burned on the tracks remained in people's memories as a grim symbol of the fragility of technology. The railways, which connected cities and promised safe and fast travel, suddenly reminded us that even the most sophisticated designs are vulnerable to wear and tear and human error. The disaster also stimulated international cooperation. Railway supervisory authorities in different countries exchanged data, introduced common standards and joint inspection and certification programs, and only in this way was it possible to reduce the risk of similar scenarios recurring. In addition to official measures, there were also human stories. Stories of how passengers helped each other in the first minutes after the crash, of rescuers working in difficult conditions, of doctors fighting for the lives of the injured, and of volunteers who came to support families who had lost their loved ones. Memorials and commemorative plaques appeared in cities and stations where people gathered to honor the memory of the victims. And these places became symbols of national mourning and a commitment to never again allow such disregard for safety. Scientific research on materials taken from the scene provided valuable information about the mechanisms of metal fatigue and the behavior of structures under extreme loads, which in turn helped to design more durable components and improve the diagnosis of the condition of rails and wheels. In the long term, the lessons learned from Esquide have taken the railway industry to a new level of safety. Changes in technology, stricter regulations, and a culture of responsibility have reduced the number of serious accidents and restored people's confidence in speed as a form of modern mobility. But the memory of those who died remains alive. The stories of those who did not return, the photographs and names on the memorials remind us that the price of progress is measured not only in technical perfection, but also in respect for human life. The disaster taught engineers and managers to value warning signs and not to ignore weak indicators, which, when combined, can lead to disaster, and it is this vigilance that has become one of the most valuable legacies of the tragedy. As a result, Esquide became a turning point after which the concept of safety in the railway sector ceased to be an abstraction and became a practical responsibility for every participant in the chain, from designers and suppliers to train drivers and inspectors. And this lesson remained a key contribution of the disaster to the history of transport. Over the years, the lessons of Esquide have lived on in engineering curricula and emergency response protocols. Annual drills, symposiums on material and resource conservation, and publications in professional journals help to maintain a focus on early problem detection, while stories about those who lost their lives that night serve as a reminder of the human side of risk and the need for constant attention to safety. 23 years after the tragic incident at Paris's Montparnasse station, history seemed to repeat itself with the same cruelty and irony. Approaching Granville Station, an overloaded passenger train lost control, derailed, crashed into the station building and burst into flames, claiming 43 lives and leaving hundreds injured. In those dramatic hours, people on the platforms and in nearby houses witnessed the incredible speed of destruction, as a scene of goodness and everyday life suddenly turned into a disaster zone, where metal, fire, and panic merged into terrifying chaos. Eyewitnesses spoke of the sound of carriages exploding, columns of smoke rising above the city, screams and desperate attempts by people to save themselves, how passers-by and railway workers spared no effort to break windows and pull out the victims, guided by a single instinct to save their neighbors. The cries and whispers of grief were quickly replaced by the harsh necessity of an investigation, because the question, why, hung in the air and demanded answers. Preliminary conclusions soon became known. Overloading of the train, material fatigue, and a lack of reliable control combined to create conditions in which a routine technical malfunction turned into a tragedy, and these factors became the subject of fierce debate. Journalists, experts, and residents demanded to know who was responsible for the negligence and why the safety systems had failed. Photographs from the scene of the accident, which appeared in newspapers at the time, became stark. Evidence of how suddenly and mercilessly human worlds can be destroyed. Scenes of burnt-out carriages and the destroyed station building spread across countries and cemented France's image as a place where stories of grief are intertwined with questions of technical and administrative responsibility. Relatives of the deceased and victims faced the difficult process of searching, identifying, and burying their loved ones, with every item found and every detail remembered becoming a painful reminder of a person who had left too soon. Medical services, rescuers, and volunteers worked around the clock, trying to cope with the flow of wounded, organize hospitalization, and provide psychological assistance to those who had survived the horror. These efforts saved lives, but could not erase the trauma and loss. Official reports and subsequent accounts focused not only on the immediate causes of the accident, but also on the broader context, issues of rolling stock maintenance, loading standards, and safety regulations on the railways, and all this sparked serious discussions about whether state and corporate institutions were sufficiently prepared to protect passengers. There was a strong public response. Demonstrations, publications, and parliamentary hearings demanded clarity, accountability, and measures to prevent a recurrence in the future. As a result, regulations were revised, inspections were stepped up, and new requirements were introduced for the technical condition of carriages and train departure procedures, as well as for staff training in emergency response situations. Along with formal changes, a cultural memory of Granville emerged. Documentary reports, books, and eyewitness accounts preserved the voices of those who survived the disaster so that society would not forget the value of human life and the importance of safety measures. The memory of those days lives on in urban legends and small rituals: flowers at memorial walls, names read at memorial services, and moments of silence when residents remember their lost neighbors. It is important to note that the tragedy also revealed the social aspects of safety. Overcrowded carriages were often a consequence of economic realities and limited access to transport, and discussions after the crash touched on issues of equality, funding, and priorities for public investment, because ensuring safety requires not only technical measures but also a systematic approach to the accessibility and quality of services. In the professional environment, the disaster stimulated increased attention to materials, control methods, and maintenance cycles. Engineers began to devote more time to analyzing fatigue processes, the reliability of connections, and possible failure scenarios, while regulators began to demand greater transparency from operators and suppliers. Equally important was the work to support survivors and the families of those who died. Medical and psychological assistance, social rehabilitation, and compensation programs did not bring back what had been lost, but they helped to restore at least minimal living conditions. Years later, the site of the tragedy is marked with memorials and sometimes becomes a place where people come to remember the names and reflect on the fragility of life. Granville has been included in railway safety training programs as a reminder that even in an era of technological progress, constant monitoring, care, and preparedness for the unexpected are necessary, and the lessons of that disaster live on in the rules, inspection practices, and professional ethics of those responsible for transporting people. Although time heals and life goes on, the memory of the 43 people who died and the hundreds who were injured remains a demand for justice and constant effort to never repeat mistakes that cost human lives. And so the story of Granville is not only a chronicle of grief, but also a call for constant attention to safety, respect for every life, and the need to do everything possible to ensure that railways remain a means of connection rather than tragedy. On October 26, 1895, an event took place at the Montparnasse station in Paris which, due to its strange visual impact, left no one indifferent, neither contemporaries nor descendants. On that autumn morning, a regular passenger train approaching the platform was involved in a curious and dramatic incident when, according to the chronicles, the actions of the driver led to a catastrophic error in braking. The driver, possibly tired from a long shift or confused by the technical layout of the control levers, mixed up the operating systems, and instead of smooth braking, a different mode was activated, which led to the locomotive crashing into the end of the platform without having time to slow down. The light yet monstrous scale of the situation was that the powerful steam locomotive broke through the barrier and smashed through the wall, as if jumping out onto the street, hanging with its nose over the square in front of the station. And this image contrasted so sharply with the usual calm of a city morning that photographs from the scene quickly spread through newspapers and lithographic sheets. Surprisingly, only one person died in this drama of human error and metallurgical forces, which many contemporaries considered a miracle or a result of a lucky coincidence. Nevertheless, the scene itself, the locomotive suspended above the street, the passengers in a state of shock, and the gathered crowds, became a powerful symbol and subject of discussion about the speed of technological progress and human responsibility, especially at a time when railways were the main link in industrial society. Photographs capturing the locomotive frozen above the square were widely distributed and became an early mass visual phenomenon. Reproductions were distributed in public transport salons, adorned magazines, and many cartoonists and satirists used this scene as a metaphor for the sudden conflict between technology and everyday life. In historical essays and memoirs of contemporaries, the Montparnasse incident is often mentioned not so much as a technical disaster, but as a lesson in attentiveness and a warning that even progress with tremendous power can stumble upon human negligence. An analysis of the incident conducted later by engineers and railway experts showed that a combination of human error, inadequate training standards, and the relative unpredictability of the new braking mechanisms created the conditions for the mistake, prompting a review of safety procedures and improved training for locomotive crews. Over the years, the story of that morning's events became part of urban folklore. Tourists took photos near the spot where the locomotive with its nose sticking out once stood, and guides jokingly recounted the story of a drama that could have been much worse if circumstances had been different. The cultural significance of the disaster proved to be multifaceted. From engineering adjustments to aesthetic reflections on the interaction between man and machine, and it was partly this multifaceted nature that made the story of Montparnasse the subject of research in books on the history of transport and the sociology of urban life. In the public perception, the incident became a mirror of modernity. It intertwined fear of new technologies, admiration for their capabilities, and anxiety about the fate of humanity in a world where the pace of change sometimes seems uncontrollable. Many historians note that the public response was partly due to the novelty of the visual image of the incident itself, because people had rarely seen such dramatic combinations of architecture and technology before, and so the image of the locomotive hanging over the square had an effect similar to what we now call viral. Over time, the very name of the incident became embedded in the collective memory and became a metaphor for carelessness and unexpectedness, reminding us that behind every technical achievement there are people with their weaknesses, and that systems must be built with the mysterious variable of the human factor in mind. Today, historians and engineers, looking back on that autumn accident, see it not only as a curiosity, but also as an important call to action. Strengthening maintenance standards, mandatory testing of braking systems, and stricter regulations for locomotive operating licenses. The families of those who were on the platforms or on the train at the time preserved memories that were passed on to their descendants, and these personal stories about fear, unexpected rescue, and the speed of human reaction in extreme situations still resonate in reports and biographies. The consequences of the accident led to changes in urban planning around railway stations, with stronger barriers and protective structures to prevent similar locomotive crashes into public spaces. The Montparnasse episode has entered the list of stories that teach us to respect complex technology and at the same time be attentive to the human factor, because nothing happens in isolation, and even the smallest mistake can take on frightening proportions. In the end, the story of the locomotive hanging over the square remained in people's memories not only because of the one life that was miraculously saved, but also because of the image that became a reminder of responsibility, the need for training, and the fact that progress requires not only ingenuity but also discipline. Photographs of this scene quickly became a subject of discussion and inspiration. Artists created cartoons, photographers republished reproductions, and cinematographers and chroniclers used the image of the suspended locomotive as a symbol of an era of change. Exhibits featuring these photographs can still be found in museum displays today, where they serve as a testament to how a single mistake can become part of a society's collective memory. And this image continues to resonate vividly. The year 1989 in the history of railway transport in one of the Yugoslav republics will forever be remembered as the day when a combination of human error, technical fatigue, and organizational shortcomings resulted in the worst tragedy on the rails for this region. An overloaded passenger train traveling along a mountainous route, packed with people rushing to their destinations and returning home, entered a long tunnel where its brakes failed on the descent, and the moment when the train turned from a means of transport into a trap proved decisive. Panic broke out inside the carriage, but it was not only the fear of impact or crash that paralyzed people. The main factor, which rarely comes to mind before a tragedy, was the lack of fresh air, the accumulation of smoke and combustion products, which quickly worsened the condition of the passengers. In the confined space of the tunnel, where the ventilation shafts were unable to cope, the smoke instantly became thick and poisonous, and the oxygen needed for breathing was dwindling with every passing minute, turning attempts to escape into a desperate struggle for every breath. Many people tried to get out through the emergency exits, but the cramped conditions, the crush and the poor lighting made this difficult, and those who jumped out of the carriages while they were moving, with poor visibility, often suffered serious injuries or got lost in the commotion. Others remained inside, hoping for rescue, but wave after wave of suffocating smoke came in, and after a short time, the ability to think and act was lost, replaced by growing weakness and loss of consciousness. Rescuers arriving at the scene were confronted with a road full of debris and the fact that breathing apparatus and equipment for working deep in the tunnel were clearly insufficient. The Railway Administration and local civil defense services were not prepared for a scenario in which a large number of people had to be evacuated urgently from a confined space with poor ventilation. As a result, official reports and investigators' reports recorded a tragic death toll of 160 people, a number that became a stark reminder of how ill-conceived infrastructure combined with human negligence can claim hundreds of lives. Investigations revealed a chain of errors, from overloading the train and violating safety rules when accepting passengers to outdated braking systems and lack of timely maintenance, as well as underestimating the risks associated with operating railways with long, closed sections. Journalistic investigations and independent audits also pointed to problems in the organization of rescue operations and the fact that many services simply did not have the necessary experience and equipment to work in a smoke-filled tunnel, where every minute lost meant additional casualties. Public outrage was deep and multifaceted. Relatives of the victims demanded truth and accountability, trade unions and public organizations demanded reforms, and transport safety experts put forward specific proposals for modernization and increased transparency in procurement and rolling stock maintenance procedures. Politically, the disaster sparked a wave of criticism of railway managers and local officials, as many saw the tragedy not as a mere accident, but as a manifestation of systemic problems, lack of investment, disregard for rules, and even traces of corruption schemes, where cost-cutting and savings on repairs had become common practice. In everyday life, the consequences were felt for a long time. Survivors struggled with physical and psychological trauma, families buried their loved ones, and many communities, especially in mountainous areas, experienced a collective trauma that was passed down from generation to generation. At the same time, the disaster became a catalyst for change. Regulations on passenger train loading were revised, requirements for the technical condition of braking systems were tightened, and regular inspections were introduced to detect early signs of material fatigue and component wear. Particular attention was paid to tunnel ventilation issues. New forced ventilation systems were installed, methods for monitoring smoke and carbon dioxide concentrations were improved, and rescue teams were retrained and equipped with modern equipment for working in conditions of limited visibility and smoke. In addition to technical measures, a change in safety culture has also become important. Companies are now required to publish reports on inspections carried out. External audit mechanisms have been introduced and the responsibility of officials has been increased, while public control and the role of independent inspections have grown, helping to reduce the risk of similar incidents recurring. The Bulvin crash remains in people's memories as a tragic reminder that the railway is not just about technology and timetables, but also about lives entrusted to the system, and that cutting corners on safety can result in irreparable grief. Memorials and commemorative plaques erected in the communities where people were lost have become places of mourning and reflection, where people try to preserve the memory of the victims and support the survivors. And these places serve as a reminder of the price that society sometimes pays for its mistakes. The ultimate lesson learned from that tragedy is simple and stark. Safety requires constant attention, investment, and honesty in management, because no human life should be sacrificed for the sake of economy or negligence. On December 26, 2004, one of the most devastating natural disasters in recent human history unfolded on the Pacific and Indian coasts. And among the many tragedies, that day will forever be remembered as the day when a train became a tomb for hundreds of people. The passenger train, known as the Queen of the Sea, followed the coastline of Sri Lanka, winding between palm groves and beaches, and many passengers, admiring the view of the ocean without a care in the world, had no idea that in a matter of minutes the coast would become the scene of an apocalypse. The wave, caused by a powerful underwater tremor far out in the Indian Ocean, came suddenly and with immeasurable force, sweeping away everything in its path, and when it engulfed the carriages, the metal body of the train was crushed by the force of nature, the carriages overturned, crumpled and thrown into the water and mud, and inside, people, many of whom were families, with bags and packages, with children and elderly people, found themselves trapped in a terrible trap. Eyewitnesses and survivors said that at first there was a deafening roar and a feeling as if the earth itself had risen beneath their feet. Then a frenzied rush of water carrying debris, bodies and cars, and in a matter of moments the beach, once full of laughter and sunshine, was transformed into a field of destruction and death. Rescuers, local residents and volunteers rushed to the scene of the disaster, and stories of selfless attempts to pull people out of the wrecked carriages, of those who risked their own lives to pull someone's hand out of the mud, became one of the things that helped to preserve humanity in the madness of that night. But despite their efforts, more than 1,700 people were confirmed dead, and this number, announced in official reports, became a sign of the magnitude of the tragedy, comparable to natural disasters. For a long time after the events, wreckage from the carriages, personal belongings, photographs and children's toys lay along the coastline, and these items became the last thread connecting relatives to a part of their lives that was irretrievably lost. Identifying the victims was difficult. Many bodies were so badly damaged or washed away that the identification process took weeks and months, and thousands of families received news of the disappearance of their loved ones without precise information about their burial sites. International aid poured into the island. Rescue teams, doctors, psychologists, and humanitarian convoys arrived, and for a time the whole world turned its attention to the suffering of Sri Lanka. But no amount of aid could bring back those who had been taken by the disaster that day. The image of a train half buried in sand and silt became a symbol of the tragedy. Photographers and journalists working on site captured scenes that later became illustrations of grief and thoughts about the fragility of human existence in the face of nature. For many countries and for the international community, it was the Queen of the Sea that became the embodiment of how loudly and cruelly the elements can make themselves felt, and how unpredictable the consequences of human presence in areas that seemed safe can be. Months and years after the disaster, monuments and memorials created by both local residents and international organizations appeared at the site of the train crash, and people came to these monuments to light candles, leave flowers, and pray for those who did not return home. The monument serves not only as a reminder of those who died, but also as a warning. The memory of this tragedy stimulated changes in the tsunami warning system, accelerated the introduction of measures to monitor underwater seismic activity, and prompted the creation of programs to educate the population on how to behave in the event of a giant wave. Personal stories related to the train remain the most powerful and defy statistics. Stories of rescued children, of families who lost each other forever, of people who found the remains of their loved ones far from the scene of the disaster, and of those who, by a lucky coincidence, did not board that train because they were delayed for a minute. These human stories are precisely what makes the tragedy both global and deeply personal. In the cultural memory of Sri Lanka and the international community, the Queen of the Sea has acquired symbolic status, and its name repeatedly stirs the consciousness when the word tsunami is mentioned. Studying the causes and analyzing those events showed scientists and administrations that coastal infrastructure and evacuation plans must take into account unlikely but catastrophic scenarios, and a number of coastal settlements were rebuilt, evacuation routes were created, and loudspeaker warning systems were installed. Nevertheless, no engineering solution can completely subdue nature, and the memory of that December day retains the feeling of a bitter lesson. People can build rails and trains, but the elements remain beyond human control, and it is this realization that makes the image of a train washed away into the ocean so tragic and at the same time instructive. Today, when tourists pass by the memorials and places where the carriages once stood, many of them slow down to remember, pay their respects, and reflect on the price that humanity sometimes pays for its closeness to the beauty of nature. And in this memory, the Queen of the Sea remains not just a tragedy. It has become a symbol of vulnerability, solidarity, and